the battle that saved Christian Europe. When Frankish hammers stopped Islam's conquest of the West, October 10th, 732. The fields near the town of Tours in southern France are about to become a graveyard, not just for soldiers, but for an entire way of life. For the last 100 years, the Islamic Caliphate has conquered everything in its path. In just a single century, Muslim armies have swept across Arabia, Persia, North Africa, and into Spain. They've destroyed empires. They've converted millions. They've built a civilization that rivals Rome at its height. Now they've set their sights on something new, the complete conquest of Western Europe. Standing between them and total victory is a man named Charles Martel. Not a king, not a nobleman with ancient lineage, just a warrior, a general, a man with a hammer and the will to use it, and the Frankish army he commands. On this October morning, roughly 30,000 Frankish warriors face off against 80,000 Islamic cavalry, the elite forces of the Umayyad Caliphate. An army that hasn't been stopped. An army that's conquered half the world. An army that believes they're the instrument of God's will to spread Islam across the entire earth. They're confident. They're seasoned. They've destroyed every Christian army they've faced. They have no idea what's about to happen. Because today, against impossible odds, a Christian general and his Frankish warriors are going to stop the Islamic conquest of Europe. They're going to prove that the West can fight back. They're going to save a faith, a continent, and an entire civilization. And they're going to do it not with swords and glory, but with disciplined formation, iron will, and a refusal to break. This is the story of the Battle of Tours, the day that Islamic expansion reached its limit, the day that Christian Europe proved it would not fall, the day that the fate of the entire Western world was decided in a single afternoon, the day everything changed. To understand Tours, you have to understand the sheer scale of Islamic conquest in the 7th and 8th centuries. In 610 AD, Muhammad founds Islam in Arabia. For the next 2 decades, the religion spreads through Arabia and surrounding regions. It's a rapid expansion, but localized. Then Muhammad dies in 632 AD. What follows is nothing short of a military and religious revolution. The Islamic Caliphate, the unified state created by Muhammad's successors, launches an unprecedented campaign of conquest. Not just wars of survival or territorial expansion, but a deliberate, organized religious mission to conquer the entire world and bring it under Islamic rule. And it's working. In less than 100 years, Muslim armies conquer. Arabia, conquered in 20 years. The Levant, conquered in 15 years. Egypt, conquered in 2 years. Persia, conquered in 25 years. North Africa, conquered in 50 years. Entire civilizations, some of them thousands of years old, are conquered and converted in the span of a human lifetime. By 701 AD, Islamic armies have reached the western edge of North Africa, and they stare across the Strait of Gibraltar at Spain, which is wealthy, Christian, and defenseless. A Muslim general named Tariq ibn Ziyad looks at Spain and sees opportunity. He lands with a small force, maybe 7,000 men, and immediately begins conquering Spanish territory. The Spanish Christian kingdoms, fractured and fighting each other, can't mount an effective defense. Within 3 years, almost all of Spain is under Islamic control. The Islamic Caliphate has now conquered 3 continents. From the deserts of Arabia to the mountains of Spain, the Islamic faith rules supreme. And now, the Muslim generals set their sights on the richest prize of all, Western Europe. In 732, the Islamic Caliphate is at the height of its power. The Umayyad Caliph, Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik, rules from Damascus. His empire stretches from Central Asia to Spain. He has more gold, more soldiers, more resources than any Christian kingdom in Europe. And he has a vision to convert all of Europe to Islam, to bring the Christian faith to its knees, to create a universal Islamic civilization that spans from the Atlantic to China. It's not a crazy dream. Given Islamic military success, it seems entirely possible. To conquer Europe, the Caliph sends one of his most capable generals, Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi. Al-Rahman is a veteran of dozens of battles. He's never lost. He commands 80,000 cavalry, the finest Muslim warriors in the world. In 732, Al-Rahman launches his invasion. He marches north from Spain with the intention of conquering the Christian kingdoms of France, then sweeping into Italy, Germany, and beyond. The goal is simple: convert or conquer every Christian nation in Western Europe. The Islamic army is unstoppable. They burn cities, they slaughter the inhabitants, they convert those who surrender. Those who resist are put to the sword. The Christian kingdoms of France, one after another, fall before the Islamic advance. Aquitaine falls, Toulouse falls. The Islamic army keeps marching north, seemingly unstoppable. By autumn of 732, they're only a few hundred miles from the heart of Christian Europe. But they've made one miscalculation. They've underestimated the Franks. The Franks are a Germanic people who've conquered much of what is now France, Germany, and surrounding territories. They're not a highly organized empire. They're more of a collection of Frankish kingdoms, all vaguely united, but often fighting each other. For the last few decades, they've been led by a family that's slowly consolidating power, the Carolingians. The most important Carolingian is a man named Charles Martel. His name literally means Charles the Hammer. He got the nickname because of his reputation for brutal warfare and his tendency to crush enemies with overwhelming force. Charles Martel is not a king. Technically, he's the mayor of the palace, a military administrator under a weak Frankish king. But in reality, he's the most powerful man in the Frankish realm. He commands the Frankish armies, controls the gold, and makes the real decisions. When reports come to Charles that an Islamic army of 80,000 is marching north from Spain, burning cities and converting populations, he understands immediately that the Frankish people face extinction. This isn't a regional conflict. This is a battle for the soul of Western civilization. Charles makes a decision. He will march south to meet the Islamic army. He will stake everything on one battle. If he wins, the Islamic advance into Europe stops. If he loses, Western Europe falls to Islamic conquest. There's no middle ground, no compromise, just victory or annihilation. Charles calls up every Frankish warrior he can muster. He conscripts men, he raises levies, he calls in allies. By the time he's ready to march, he has assembled roughly 30,000 to 40,000 men. Not all of them are professional soldiers. Many are farmers and commoners, forced into military service. But they're tough, they're disciplined, and they're fighting for their homeland and their faith. In September 732, Charles marches south with his army to meet the Islamic threat. The battle site is chosen near the town of Tours in central France. Charles deliberately chooses a location that favors his infantry. He positions his men on higher ground, with forests nearby to prevent flanking maneuvers. He knows his men can't match the Islamic cavalry in open ground. But in a defensive position, with good ground and strong discipline, they might have a chance. The Islamic general, Abd al-Rahman, surveys the Frankish position and is not impressed. His cavalry is legendary. They've never met a foe they couldn't break in open battle. The idea that Frankish peasants and militia could stand against the elite cavalry of the Umayyad Caliphate seems absurd. But al-Rahman is not stupid. He knows that the Frankish position is strong, and he knows that time is not on his side. Winter is approaching. He needs to break the Frankish army quickly before cold weather forces a retreat. So he decides to attack immediately, force a decision. Let his superior cavalry break the Frankish lines through sheer shock and violence. It's a reasonable plan. It's worked against every Christian army he's faced. October 10th, 732. The battle begins. The Islamic cavalry charges. It's a terrifying sight. Thousands of mounted warriors, all screaming Allahu Akbar, riding forward with lances and scimitars, charging at the Frankish lines. The Franks stand firm. Charles has positioned them in tight formation, with spears pointed outward like a porcupine. The cavalry charges straight at them, and crashes against the Frankish line like waves against a cliff. Horses slam into the spear line. Some break through, others are stopped cold, riders thrown, horses impaled on spears. The Islamic cavalry is used to breaking formations through sheer momentum. But these Franks refuse to break. The charge pushes the Frankish line back slightly, but doesn't penetrate it. The Franks hold firm, shields locked, spears forward, standing shoulder to shoulder. The Islamic cavalry pulls back, regrouping for another charge. Charles watches and realizes the Frankish formation is working. The Islamic cavalry's greatest advantage, speed and mobility, is neutralized by a strong defensive position. The Franks can't win by attacking, but they can win by standing still and making the Islamic cavalry come to them. The second charge comes. More Islamic cavalry thunder forward. Again, they crash against the Frankish line. Again, they fail to break through. Some Franks fall, but the line holds. Charge after charge, the Islamic cavalry hurls itself against the Frankish formation, and charge after charge, the Franks refuse to break. It's a battle of attrition now. Every charge that fails costs Islamic lives. Every hour that passes means more Islamic soldiers dead, more Islamic horses exhausted. But the Franks stand. They're tired. They're bleeding. But they stand. At one point during the battle, a rumor spreads through the Islamic ranks that Frankish warriors are moving around to attack the Islamic baggage train, to steal the treasure and supplies. The rumor causes panic. Islamic soldiers worry that they'll lose their plunder, their supplies, their wealth. Discipline breaks. Some units turn away from the battle to defend the baggage train. It's a small thing, but it's the turning point. With the Islamic forces partially diverted, with discipline cracking, the Frankish counterattack is unleashed. Charles orders his cavalry to charge. His mounted warriors break from the formation and crash into the already weakened Islamic cavalry. The Islamic army, surprised and partially diverted, begins to collapse. What was supposed to be an easy conquest turns into a desperate retreat. The Islamic general, Abd al-Rahman, tries to hold the line. He rides forward, rallying his troops, trying to restore order. But it's too late. The Islamic army is breaking apart. In the chaos of the fighting, Abd al-Rahman is killed, struck down fighting on horseback, trying to prevent his army's collapse. With their general dead, with their formation broken, with Frankish cavalry now attacking from multiple angles, the Islamic army turns and flees. They don't just retreat, they run. They abandon their baggage, their supplies, their dead. They run south back toward Spain, pursued by Frankish cavalry. By sunset, the Battle of Tours is over, and the Islamic conquest of Europe has been stopped. The casualties are devastating, especially for the Islamic army. Conservative estimates suggest 10,000 to 15,000 Islamic soldiers are killed. Some sources claim even higher numbers, up to 25,000 or more. The Frankish losses are severe too. perhaps 4,000 to 6,000 killed. But it's a fraction of what the Islamic army suffered. More importantly, the Islamic army is broken. They don't try to continue north. They don't try to conquer more Christian territory. They retreat to Spain, which remains under Islamic control. Abd al-Rahman's successor tries to mount another invasion a year later. But it's a half-hearted effort. The momentum is gone. The myth of Islamic invincibility is shattered. From this point on, the Islamic conquest stops. Europe is saved. The historical significance of Tours cannot be overstated. If the Islamic forces had won, if Charles Martel had been defeated, the entire trajectory of Western civilization changes. The Christian kingdoms of Europe would have fallen one by one. France would have become an Islamic state, then Germany, then Italy, then Rome itself. Christianity would have been restricted to small pockets, maybe Byzantium, maybe isolated mountain regions. But as a major world religion and civilization-shaping force, it would have ended. Europe would have become an Islamic continent, part of a vast Islamic empire stretching from Spain to Central Asia. The Renaissance, the Reformation, the scientific revolution, the age of exploration. None of these happen if Europe is Islamic. Modern Western civilization, as we know it, doesn't exist. Instead, one old Frankish general, Charles Martel, and 30,000 disciplined warriors stood against the greatest military power on earth and said, "No further." And they won. For this reason, historians have called Tours one of the most consequential battles in human history. Not because it was the largest, not because it was the bloodiest, but because it determined the religious, cultural, and political future of an entire continent. After Tours, Charles Martel consolidates power in the Frankish kingdom. He's now recognized as the supreme leader of the Franks. His dynasty, the Carolingians, will go on to rule Europe for centuries. His grandson is Charlemagne, who will be crowned the first emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. The Carolingian dynasty creates the foundation for medieval Europe, for feudalism, for Christian civilization, for everything that Western Europe becomes. None of this happens without Charles Martel's victory at Tours. The Islamic world, meanwhile, turns inward. The Umayyad Caliphate continues to rule Spain for nearly 300 years. But they never again seriously threaten to conquer Western Europe. The Islamic and Christian worlds will continue to clash for centuries. The Crusades, the Spanish Reconquista, the Ottoman Wars. But the fundamental question of whether Europe will remain Christian is answered at Tours. Tours represents something deeper than just a military victory. It represents the moment when two great civilizations, the Islamic world and the Christian world, met at the edge of what each could achieve. And at that moment, it wasn't military might that decided the outcome. It wasn't superior tactics or better generals. It was will, discipline, the refusal to break. The Islamic army had more men, better cavalry, more resources. But they lost because their momentum was broken, because a rumor about plunder distracted them at a crucial moment, and because they underestimated an enemy that refused to yield. Charles Martel won because he chose the ground carefully, because he kept his men disciplined and focused, because he refused to panic when facing what seemed like an unstoppable force. It's a lesson that echoes through history. Discipline beats numbers. Will beats force. Understanding your enemy beats arrogance. The Islamic general, Abd al-Rahman, made a crucial mistake. He underestimated his enemy. He assumed that Christian knights and peasants would break when faced with elite Islamic cavalry. He assumed that European armies were weak compared to armies from the Middle East. He was wrong, and it cost him his life, his army, and the conquest of an entire continent. The legend of Tours has grown over the centuries. Medieval Christians spoke of it as a clear sign of divine favor, that God had blessed the Christian forces and defeated the Islamic invaders. They portrayed Charles Martel as a holy warrior, fighting for the faith. Islamic historians, meanwhile, viewed it as a minor setback, a battle that was important but not decisive, since Islamic Spain continued to thrive for centuries. Modern historians recognize Tours for what it really was, a moment of profound importance, not because of religious destiny or divine intervention, but because it represented a turning point in the competition between two great civilizations. If the Islamic forces had won, the map of the world would be completely different, not just politically, but religiously, culturally, and intellectually. The Renaissance, the rebirth of classical learning that transformed Europe, happened because European scholars preserved Greek and Roman texts in Christian monasteries. Without that preservation, without the intellectual continuity that Christianity provided, Western Europe might have experienced a complete cultural reset. The Enlightenment, the period of scientific and philosophical advancement, emerged from a Christian European context. Would it have emerged from an Islamic European context? Possibly, but probably different. Modern democracy, modern science, modern Western civilization. All of it is built on foundations that were secured at Tours, not because Christianity is inherently superior to Islam, but because the victory at Tours allowed European civilization to develop along its own trajectory, with its own traditions, its own intellectual heritage. If the Islamic conquest had succeeded, Europe would have developed along a different path, neither better nor worse, just different. Charles Martel died in 741 AD, just 9 years after his victory at Tours. He's buried as a hero, a savior of Christian Europe. His legacy endures for centuries. His descendants, the Carolingians, reshape Europe and usher in the Carolingian Renaissance, a period of cultural and intellectual advancement that prepares Europe for the medieval period and eventually the modern world. In popular memory, Tours is remembered as the battle that saved Europe. It's taught in schools as the moment when Christian Europe defeated Muslim conquest. It's cited by modern commentators as proof of the superiority of Western civilization or Christian values. But that's not what Tours really was. Tours was a battle, won by better discipline, better positioning, better leadership, lost by an underestimated enemy, a crisis of morale, and the moment when momentum shifts and breaks. It happened to be a battle that determined the religious and cultural future of a continent, but at the moment it happened, the soldiers on the field had no idea of the historical significance. They were just fighting, trying to survive, trying to win against overwhelming odds. And they did. October 10th, 732. 30,000 Frankish warriors stood against 80,000 Islamic cavalry. By sunset, the Islamic conquest of Western Europe had been stopped, not by miracle or divine intervention, by discipline, by will, by the refusal of ordinary men to break when faced with what seemed like certain defeat. Charles Martel understood something that many generals have forgotten. Victory is not determined by numbers. It's determined by the ability to maintain discipline, to choose good ground, and to break the enemy's will before they break yours. He didn't have more men. He didn't have better equipment. He just had better tactics and better discipline. And that was enough. Tours represents the moment when the Islamic world's expansion westward reached its limit. From that day forward, Western Europe would remain Christian, would develop its own civilization, would eventually become the global superpower that dominates the modern world, not because of superior values or inherent superiority, but because one Frankish general and 30,000 warriors refused to yield. The ripples of that victory echo 300 years into the future. Every European, every American, every modern Westerner exists because of what happened on that October day. The battle that saved Christian Europe. The battle that changed the world.